Hello, I'm Dennis Lyons, the editor of the Daily Item in the Danville News, and I'm happy to be here to have yet another one of our ongoing conversations with candidates for political office. Our guest today is Sarah-Donnelly, State House candidate in the 107th District, and she's running against Kurt Masser. This is Sarah, your first time running for office. Real quickly, get me a sense of what inspired you to get involved in this.
Well, Dennis, I grew up in Shamokin and ended up out in New Jersey for 26 years. I moved back to the area 10 years ago. And when I came back, I started noticing, what was going on here in the area. My hometown of Shamokin, I live in Elysburg now. But I just kept thinking that somebody needs to do something to help our small towns. And the more I got involved with trying to be supportive of our local candidates, the more I decided that maybe it was time for me to step up and do something also. I have a degree in accounting. I think that I could do a really good job representing the interests of the people here in Mount Carmel, Shamokin, Cole Township, Elysburg, Danville, Montour, all Montour County, and I really just felt that I could do a good public service.
When you're out campaigning, what are the top couple issues you're hearing from people that they're concerned about?
Well, big thing, of course, is drugs and the opioid crisis. I hear a lot about that. Property taxes are too high. Our schools are not doing as well as they should. The urban blight problem. The problem that we lose so many of our young people move out of the area trying to find jobs. And, that's a very difficult thing to address. And I think part of that is that we really have to work on our school systems.
Okay. Property taxes being too high is something we hear a lot. What are your thoughts about what needs to be done? There's been several proposals to eliminate the property taxes, the primary funding of school expenses. What do you think needs to happen in the world of property taxes?
Well, that, of course, is a very difficult problem. I think that our school systems, we have 6 school systems in the 107th, and particularly the Shamokin and Mount Carmel school districts are very underfunded. That's because you cannot possibly raise enough in property taxes to fully fund those schools. So I agree that something else has to be done besides property taxes. Is it going to be something in addition to property taxes, or are we going to eliminate property taxes altogether as a source of funds for schools and do something entirely different? I'm open to any plan that fully funds our public schools. We can still do it through the property tax system, which we have traditionally done it through. This, of course, becomes a burden to the elderly as they move on to fixed incomes and taxes continue to rise. So we could do something like making adjustments to the homestead rebate program, that once somebody hits 65, a portion of their property taxes gets rebated to them and keeps them basically at a consistent tax level. That can get kind of complicated and cumbersome. There are other ways to do things like that. This new idea of totally eliminating property taxes, now you got to go to either increasing the income tax or sales tax. So one way or another you have to pay for the schools. And I am all about looking for a bipartisan solution to that. I do not adhere solidly to one system or the other. I think we have to negotiate that and figure that out together.
Okay. One of the key issues that's come up a lot in our conversations moving towards the November 6th election is the issue of statute of limitations for those who are victims of sexual assault as children. We had obviously the major report by the Attorney General on issues involving the Catholic Church, but certainly the Church is not alone in having issues with having people abuse children in the past and perhaps even now. What we have asked about is there was a proposal in the House that passed handily to allow a window for people to take on in at least a civil situation the people accused of the child abuse. The Senate, however, has not been able to get together on a move forward on that. What is your thoughts on this issue and whether there ought to be a window opened for people who are the victims of abuse to move forward and be able to sue their accused people.
I do not think there should be a statute of limitations on that particular crime. Crimes abusing children like that are just so reprehensible that I think it should be something that they should have to face up to the consequences of that. Sexual crimes are very, very difficult. They are psychologically damaged. Trying to say there has to be a timely prosecution or addressing of that issue is just not viable. And I think that especially people who prey on children, we should hold that window open permanently.
Opponents of that, of course, say use the slippery slope argument that if you make a window open for this, that there'll eventually be windows open for all manner of criminal and civil cases.
I don't know what to tell you about that. I think that it can be a firm line. I think anything that involves children, be it sexual or any form of physical, or emotional, and mental abuse, should be punished and should be prosecutable forever.
Okay. Bill?
Representative Moss, your opponent, is in favor of reducing the size of the state legislature. I'm curious your thought on that.
Oh my God, yes, please. Yes, yes, yes. Count me in. I think our state legislature, we have 203 representatives and 50 senators. I think it should be reduced by at least a third. I think that there will still be adequate representation per person covered by our representatives. We have one of the largest state legislators in the country per capita, and I think that we need to look at that and dial it back.
Another thing, looking on your website this morning, you're in favor of legalizing recreational marijuana in Pennsylvania as a tax boost. What has been sort of your response throughout your district?
I'm actually, because whenever I do my door-to-door canvassing, I like to get that out as a topic of conversation, because I think people get a little taken aback that a politician would so upfront talk about something like that. But I think that there are so many pros versus the cons of this issue. In addition to being able to raise 200 to 300 million in sales tax, we could experience 18,000 jobs created. And job creation is a big thing around here. I think that we're seeing more and more states legalize it. I use Colorado specifically because they have a few years on the books, and there are some statistics coming out of there. For instance, they have realized a 6% reduction in opioid-related deaths. They've experienced what they're assessing as possibly as much as a 25% decrease in opioid usage. I think that this speaks very strongly to a motivation to legalize it. I also think that I equate recreational marijuana use to alcohol use. It is something that would be restricted to adults, treated much the same as alcohol, same punishments, you drive high, you drive drunk, all the same. But we could also then experience savings in our judicial system, our policing, our prison system. I mean, as an economic issue, I think let's just legalize it. We're also seeing now, I just read a headline the other day that 66% of the population now favor it. I think that it is going to happen. I think it's just stuck in a certain stigmatized, evil image of it that is not really part of our culture anymore.
So then it goes without saying you would support, at least short-term, the decriminalization of it, so that possession of a small amount of marijuana would be tantamount to a parking ticket or some other...
Not even that. If you're over 21 and you have it, I think that anybody who's in jail and who had previous convictions for marijuana offenses, they should be expunged. I think that this then gives people a clean criminal background check, and they can get back to work and not be part of our social welfare system, and not be part of the recidivism problem of going back to jail because they couldn't find a job.
Okay, John?
We've read that that you're in favor of increasing the minimum wage. What what rate do you think it should be? And should it be some kind of a gradual increase, or how do you foresee that happening?
I would like to see it go to $12 per hour. I think that would give a family of four with two working parents a reasonable standard of living. Right now, if you're working full-time and you have one child, you're living below the poverty line. And there's something wrong with that you can't work a full-time job and be above the poverty line. I think that we have to reassess what we're doing for society in general. And I think that plays a lot into helping the least amongst us and bringing them up so they can afford a decent place to live, food on the table, and clothes on their back.
We have to do more for people in society in general. That's an awfully broad statement to make. Do you want to get a little specific on that?
Well, we have people who have drug problems. We have to help them. And, it's funny that I'm talking about drug problems when I just in, the last topic talked about legalizing recreational marijuana. But we have people who have addictions that they cannot help themselves. We have the opioids. And we have to do that through better intervention, education, treatment. We have to treat them like people with a disease, not people that are criminals. And that takes an adjustment to the way society thinks about it and the way our criminal justice works. Yes, there are some who will never be able to break that addiction, but there are a lot more that we could probably help if we but try. So yes, I really want to help society.
What you said, the first thing you said people are talking about is the opioid and heroin problem.
Yes.
What specifically do you think the legislature needs to do moving forward to address that issue?
Well, I think that there has to be some assistance. There's a lot of grandparents who are now raising their grandchildren because their children are addicted and not able to fulfill their family responsibilities. And I know that there have been some laws that have been passed to help those people. There's some financial assistance. And, this is something that we should be doing, and we should be doing more of.
Okay. Are there specific things that you would like to propose if you get to the state legislature on this issue?
For drugs?
Yeah.
We have to make sure that every community has a strong community-based halfway house, if you want to call it that, addiction center. It has to start in the local communities. So having funding for that and having that readily available. Because if you put an outreach office in Sunbury and people are up in Shamokin, but they don't even have a car to get there, how does that help them? So strengthening that network, deploying trained professionals to help and actually assisting the families of addicts with counseling is very important. I've met a wonderful woman up in Shamokin. They meet every week. It's a support group of people with children who are addicts, and they need help. They need to be able to have some professional advice, some professional psychological counseling as to how they deal with their own problems dealing with these kids of theirs. And it is a big problem in these towns. People are, it's a depressed economic area, and I think that they turn to the drugs as escapism. So again, it's all part of a sort of circular problem. We need better jobs, we need better wages, and people won't, feel such despair.
Okay. You mentioned what if they don't have a car to get to the place? That is an issue that sometimes comes up in these conversations. Transportation is not widely available to a lot of people, and there has been there's a pilot program in the works to at least try to establish a PennDOT route up and down 1115. But what are your thoughts on establishing any public transportation in our area?
That is a really, really difficult problem because everything is so remote up here. It's so rural. The Rabbit transit system is a phenomenal system, but it is basically geared to help the elderly get to and from doctor's appointments. And, so it's heavily subsidized by the Department of Aging. but it is not really responsive enough for general working people, or just people who have to get cross long distances. So we do need to improve that. It might be a system that could be the backbone on which we build. It would be great to have some standardized routes up and down 11 and 15, up and down 61. But it's an intractable problem for this area because it is so rural and there aren't enough people to make it economically viable.
So what's the answer?
The answer is I don't know how to solve that one.
Okay, that's a fair, honest answer. Let's talk a little bit about gun ownership and rules. We have recently had the passage and the signing by Governor Wolf of a law that will make it easier to take weapons away from those who are subject to protection from abuse orders. And there have been other suggestions for gun safety rules. Talk to me about your philosophy on gun laws and guns in general.
Well, I am a gun owner. I actually have 3 guns in the house, and I believe that people who are responsible should be allowed to have any and all guns that they want, except for assault weapons. And we've just seen yet again another massacre with assault weapons. I don't see any reason why those should be in the hands of private citizens. They aren't used for hunting, and I happen to draw a line there. Of course, you have to convince more than half of the state representatives in the House and in the Senate to pass such a thing. But if somebody proposed that, that's something I would vote for. As far as other issues on gun control, obviously criminal background checks, obviously the getting guns out of the hands of people who are convicted of domestic abuse, and obviously people who have been arrested for domestic abuse, their guns should be turned in immediately within 24 hours. And if they are proven innocent, then they get their guns back. If they are guilty, they lose them for life.
What about guns and school safety? We have some candidates who have suggested that maybe we ought to arm teachers. Others who just say that we ought to have more security at our schools. What is your feeling on that issue?
Guns do not belong in schools. Teachers should not be put on the front line facing an AR-15 with a .22 caliber handgun. I mean, that's not going to solve that problem. We need to solve the problem by getting the guns out of the hands of the people who are going to attack the schools in the first place. We need to change the way our society thinks about these people and the proliferation of guns. The shooting at the synagogue. I mean, how can you even suggest that we should have guns in churches for security's sake? It's not the solution. The solution is get rid of these assault weapons and make sure that people can pass the background checks.
Okay, Bill.
Sort of a complete pivot. You've talked about opioid, and one way to sort of get around that is to increase education opportunities here locally. From the coal region where you're from, they do have a little bit of a community college base there. They're talking about expanding it here further in Northumberland County. Now we have this report out that enrollment is down significantly in the state system of higher education. Curious your thought on what the legislature's role is in sort of maintaining the balance between those two, and perhaps creating an additional marriage between our community college program and the state system, which a lot of our students end up going to.
Well, community college in this area would be fantastic. I mean, I would love to see one in the coal region, Shamokin, Mount Carmel, Coltmont. I know they have a satellite of Luzerne there. I think it's great to have that, but we need more. The current effort is to try to get something in Sunbury, which that would be great too, but I'd really like to see it closer to where the more people are that could be taking advantage of it. I think it's important that we provide state resources for community colleges in the form of student loans. I myself went through Penn State on scholarships, grants, and student loans, and I graduated and became, a working taxpayer, have paid in lots of taxes over the course of my life, and that is because our government made an investment in me. And I think that investment in education to educate our people and get them into good paying jobs is an investment that pays back multiple times over.
I see your shirt says "Send an accountant to Harrisburg."
I'm an accountant. I have
Okay,
a
so if
bachelor's
you're an
degree from Penn
accountant,
State.
let's talk about budgeting.
Okay.
Okay, because there's obviously a lot of people, we go from taxes being too high to there being a lot of money being spent on pensions to all sorts of problems in the state. Scott Wagner, in his campaign for governor, has suggested a zero-based solution where he thinks he can find money that's being badly managed or badly spent. Tell me about your ideas of what we can do to, I guess, increase revenues and/or decrease expenses.
Well, everybody always wants to cut expenses, but that then makes you look for where waste is. And you probably don't find a lot in waste. A lot of our budget is for our programs for the aging. A lot of it is, our state budget is for education. The problem is that, and of course our infrastructure, our roads, you can't really cut these kinds of things. So my solution is to look towards new revenue streams, and that's where recreational marijuana, $300 million. There's also something called the wealth tax. Pennsylvania has flat income tax, and it's there's only actually 8 states that do. 33 states have progressive taxes. So this sort of puts Pennsylvania in an odd budgetary situation. I would like to see us move to a progressive tax, but the only way to do that would be to change our state constitution, and I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So let's look at an alternative way to do it within the Constitution, within the way our state can do it. The flat tax has to be applied equally across an income class. So we have wages from labor. We have royalty income. We have rent income. So any one of those classes can be adjusted differently. And what the wealth tax says is, let's take classes other than that earned income, something from patents and royalties, rents, and put a different tax rate on those. Now, that would have to be obviously a bipartisan negotiated rate. I'm not sure what the rate differential is, but you could adjust it anywhere from, it's currently 3.07, you could take it up to 6%, you could set it at 4.5%, but you could, in theory, get up to $2 billion in extra tax revenue that does not affect lower and middle class income people, because most of those people only have income coming from their jobs, their wages. So there is a way to grow our revenues. And obviously, we also could be doing severance tax on natural gas extraction, on fracking. 15 states do fracking, and we are the only one that doesn't have a severance tax. Now, I know we do have, I forget what they call it, the base tax when they
impact fee.
The impact fee, thank you. But there is a differential between that and what the other states are getting in a severance tax that we could collect and still be competitive with every other state. And the other thing is that 80% of the natural gas that Pennsylvania extracts goes out of state. We should be collecting tax on that. And that could be another $200 million in the state revenue to help pay for education, to help pay for our roads, to help our aging population. I mean, there's money to be had that can be done without hurting the average taxpayer.
So speaking of money to be had, gambling. Now, there's been a lot of increases in the ways that people can gamble over the last few years, and in the not too distant future, we're going to see gambling on such things as the NFL and college football and other sports. What's your view on revenue, gambling as a revenue source, and are we maybe staking too much of our budgeting needs on gambling?
I'm not a fan of it. I wouldn't say I would be entirely against it. We want consistent, stable revenue streams, and gambling is one of those things that, as the economy moves, the gambling revenue in theory moves, and this is a depressed area, so how much can you really expect to get out of, quote, gambling revenues here? I'm just, I don't think there's enough there to make it really significant.
Okay, Bill?
I'm trying to look through. You talked to sort of revisit the gambling a little bit. I think some people's problem with it has been Pennsylvania stakes so much to it, and it's so inconsistent. I don't know if that's part of your thought process, or is it more along the lines of you're not a fan of the gambling itself, or the sin taxes that Pennsylvania sort of really hits people with a lot?
Well, it's one of those things. If people want to gamble, okay. I'm not, morally against
Okay.
it. I just think it's not my preferred way to govern.
We've had some changes, obviously, in the alcohol sales situation in here in the state. We have now beer and wine at grocery stores, what have you. Should the state just move forward and just do a complete privatization of alcohol sales?
That's a very interesting question to me because I said earlier I lived in New Jersey for 26 years, and New Jersey has a liquor store basically on every other corner, and I just think that it doesn't make for a good home feel to a neighborhood. There's just I prefer that a little more out of the way and out of the mainstream. So if you have to drive a half mile to get a case of beer or whatever, the whole idea of being able to go into a convenience store or the supermarket, it's convenient. I don't think it's desirable, but again, it's one of those things. It's not that I personally like to see, but if this is what the people want to have, then that's what they have. I believe we ought to listen to what does the majority of the people say? What does the majority of the people want? And if the majority says that that's what they want, if the majority says they want hunting on Sunday, let's listen to them. The majority are currently saying let's legalize recreational marijuana.
Is that true? Are the majority people saying that?
66%.
In Pennsylvania? Or in
It might have been on the national survey. I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay.
But I think I did see a 57% of registered Pennsylvania voters. So Pennsylvania's a big state. There's the rural section and there's the urban section. So there might be a slight difference in our neck of the woods. There might not. I don't know. All I can say is, as I've been discussing this as a candidate, most people are like, so what? I've talked to hundreds of people in the last 6-8 months I've been running. And I can only really say that maybe 3 people kind of balked at it.
Okay. John?
One thing you stressed early in the conversation was that we have a variety of issues with our schools and school systems, and we've touched upon a lot of those already with school safety and the property tax and how that fits and everything else. What other major issues do our schools, do you feel, have, and how do we fix those?
My basic thing for schools is that we have to have stronger pre-K programs. And we have to make sure that we have good assessment of how these students are doing in their early years. You have to give them a strong foundation that will carry them through the whole educational process. If they fall behind by the time they're in 4th or 5th grade, they're never going to catch up. And if I were to have an extra $500 million to put into education, I'd throw it all in pre-K, because I really think that is where we start to get the kids into the whole idea of schooling. And as long as they're doing well, they'll be happy to continue. But if they get behind and get frustrated, next thing you know, we have, like in Shamokin, a 15% dropout rate. And that's not acceptable.
Okay, well, Sarah, I think we're going to leave it at that. Thank you for joining us, and
Well, thank
good
you
luck
for
in the
having
election.
me. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.